Good morning, everyone. My name is Chao Chi. I'm from University of Houston. My advisor is Professor Jifu Chen. The title of my presentation is Feasibility Analysis for Active Manipulation of Electromagnetic Fields in Free Space. Before my presentation, I would like to acknowledge the help of my co-authors, Neil and Professor Onofre. This is my outline. I will begin with a brief introduction of the background and motivation. Then I will talk about the field modeling. Here we use the integral equation method. After that, I will talk about the inversion based on the truncated singular-valued compensation method. Then I will show some simulation results, and finally I will draw the conclusion. The EM control is used in many applications. For example, the active cloaking. Cloaking means making something invisible. In this figure, the red object together with the blue one does not change the background radiation. So the presence of the object does not make any difference. So we can say this object is invisible in terms of the source. This animation can show this clear. In the left figure, this object can cause some scattering, and we can detect the scattering field to determine the presence of this object. However, the background field does not change due to the cloaking. So we can see this object is invisible. In this presentation, I will talk about the EM field control used for pattern synthesis, which means to generate some specific patterns. So in this sketch, we can see we have this spherical source and we have a bounded region. So the current on this source can produce EMH field in this region. So the question is how to design this source that can produce a desired pattern. This is the goal of my presentation. If given the field in the exterior regions, how to figure out the source distribution. Here we can see the equivalent source. And then we need to solve the source-free Maxwell equations. We call this source reconstruction problem. This is a special type of inverse source problem, which is ill-posed, and it's an optimization problem. When we solve this problem, we have two challenges. The first one, this problem is ill-posed, which means there are infinitely many solutions due to the existence of non-radiating source. So if we add the non-radiating source to the solution, it does not change the E and H field. Second, this problem is unstable, which means the solution is sensitive to small perturbation in E and H field. This is the framework of the inverse source problem. So the inverse source problem is divided into two parts. The first one is the field modeling, and the second one is the inversion. The field modeling is a mapping from the current to the E and H field. That means if given the current, and we can calculate the E and H field. The inversion is the inverse procedure of the field modeling. So we know the EM field. So how to calculate the current? So the inversion is actually an optimization problem. It minimizes the cost function. This cost function is a misfit between the generated field and the prescribed field. So when we solve this optimization problem, we can find out the optimal solution, which is the source distribution. So first, let me introduce the field modeling. So the full modeling is run the current to the field. Here we use the integral equation method. We can formulate the E and H in terms of the J and M using the integral equation. So in these integrals, the G is the dialectic Green's function. Here the X is the observation point and Y is the source point. So this GEJ means the electric field at X produced by the electric dipole placed in Y. So you can see the J and M is in a 3D closed surface. It's continuous. So we need to discretize the J and M using the basis function. Here we use the RWG basis function. After the discretization, the continuous integrals will be transformed to the linear system. After talking about the forward modeling, in this slide I will talk about the inversion. The inversion is exactly opposite to forward modeling. That is, we need to figure out the J and M from E and H field. So the inverse source problem is to find an unknown cost from its known effect. So as I mentioned, this inversion is formulated as an optimization problem that minimizes the cost function. Here we need to add the regularization to stabilize the solution. So we need to use the truncated singular value decomposition method. So A is decomposed in this form. Then we need to calculate the procedural inverse of A. And finally, we can get the solution of this X, which is in this form. In the right figure, you can see this is the error versus the number of singular values. If we use more singular values, we can get the lower error. But actually, we can truncate this singular value by setting a threshold of this error. In previous slides, I just showed the forward modeling and inversion separately. In this slide, I will show a big picture of this method. In this figure, let's recall the goal of our study. So we need to figure out the J and M given the E and H field in this region. So we know the E and H field, and we don't know the J and M. So first, we just formulate the E and H field in terms of J and M, and then we just solve this optimization problem to get the J and M. This J and M actually it can generate the E prime and H prime, and we get the misfit between the field. We just minimize this misfit, and we can get the optimum J and M. So after talking about the method, here I will show some preliminary results. So as mentioned, we just apply this method for the pattern synthesis application. So now, in this example, we just want to generate a plane wave in this region. This is the annular sector, and the orange one is the source. It's a sphere. So these are some parameters. So we want to generate a plane wave in the direction, and the electric field is polarized in the x direction. Here, this is the definition of this region. This figure just shows the E and H field synthesis. So the first row is the electric field, and the second row is the magnetic field. Because we only have the EX and the HY as non-zero component, so we only show these two components. So the first column is the prescribed field, which is already known, and the second column is the generated field. So this is corresponding to the AX, and this is corresponding to B in the formulation. And the third column is the relative error. It is calculated by this formula. So if we compare the field pattern, we can find they are almost the same. And also we can see the relative error is pretty small. Even at some regions we can find the big relative error, but the overall L2 relative error is in order 10 to the minus 4. It's pretty small, which means our method can achieve very good control. This figure shows the current. This is the X in our formulation. So we can see this is Jx, Jy, and Jz. So we can see this is a high power source. The magnitude of the current is very large. So in this case, we have to say it's very challenging to realize this kind of source. In the previous slides, I just show a benchmark example to show the feasibility of our method. So in this slide, I will show the sensitivity study. Here we only change one parameter and keep other parameter fixed. And we just want to investigate the dependence on this parameter. So first we show the relative error, and the second one is the power budget, and the third one is the quality factor. The power budget contains the radiated power and the stored energy. These two powers are calculated using this equation. As long as we get the power, and we can calculate the quality factor. So we can see when we increase wave number, equivalently we increase the operating frequency. We can find this relative error increase fast, and also for the power budget. So we can see our method will be very challenging to achieve a good control at high frequencies. So in the second example, we just show the sensitivity study when we change the distance between the source and the control region. As you can see in this sketch, we just move the control region further and further away from the source. So also we can find if the mutual distance between the control region and the source is larger, and the relative error will be larger, and also the power budget. So we can see it's challenging to control the region that is far from the source. Here we have some conclusion. First, the active control of the electromagnetic field is formulated as a inverse source problem. The integral equation method is applied in Ford modeling, and the truncated singular value compensation is used in inversion. And also, we find the proposed approach is able to approximate the known EM field in exterior regions. And finally, the sensitivity study just indicates the active EM field control at high frequency or controlling far region can be challenging. Okay, that's all for my presentation. Do you have any questions?